Uh, Also, just so the youth are aware, real quick, we do have refuge tonight as well. So 6 to 7:30 right here, and it's always good to celebrate with people, right? And Braden's got his driver's license now, so good job, Braden. He loves being called out, I'm sure. So that was a great worship set, a great prayer. So it ties into the message, and Aubrey and I didn't talk about anything really as far as it all goes, but it was cool to see the songs that he chose and the prayer that he just did, because really that does sum up the message that we're going to look at today. I just got back last night from Wisconsin. Me and the wife and the kids went up to northern Wisconsin, where it was cold. It felt so wonderful. I think Angie had pants on most of the time, so it was really, really nice. But there's something about being up in nature. And we went up there with her parents. We stayed in a cabin up in the woods. There was, a lake and trees. Angie fell in love with the kayak. She did it like every day. She wants to get a kayak now. But she doesn't want the snakes that are here. So like up there, no water moccasins. Here, water moccasins. And so we had a lot of fun just being out in nature, right? And we saw a water ski show. We saw some lumberjacks. We went to a petting zoo where like the kids could pet deer and skunks. That was kind of crazy. The skunk felt like a little cat, like a kitty. So it's very soft. So if you ever want to wonder what a skunk feels like, you can go ahead, find one, pet one. It'll be fine. And so we were up there. We went swimming. That was great. I had a good time swimming with my kids. And for those of you who know me, like I know you guys know, I have a very low tolerance for water, for the coolness of water. And so up there, the lake was small enough where it was fairly warm, enough that I could go out and play with the kids and everything, because I'm a really big wuss when it comes to cold water. And and it was great. And then one night I took Aaron and Elizabeth outside, because I remember living in Wisconsin. I came from a small town there, and at night I would go outside and I could see the stars and the constellations and everything. And I haven't seen those in a long time, because I've always, since then lived in larger cities where you can't see them as much with the lights. And so I took the kids out one night, and I had downloaded one of those apps on the iPad for Aaron that has like the constellations, and you move the iPad and then it like shows you, where all the stars are and everything. You can see the satellites, and you can see all of these things. And so we went out and we went on the dock of the lake, and so we were out there on this lake watching the stars, and the sun had just gone down, so it wasn't like dark, but it was dark enough that you could see the stars, and you could see the satellites if you looked. And I was using the app because I don't know the constellations anymore. We looked and we were able to see some of those constellations, and then we looked at this really bright star, and it was Jupiter. And then we looked just to the left of it, and there was Saturn. And it was pretty amazing, because when you're around it, and you're up in nature, and you see the lakes and the trees, and you see these planets. Jupiter's 300 million miles away. Saturn's like 746, so it will take like 12 or 29 years just to get to those planets, right? And you get a sense of the overwhelmingness of creation, right? Sometimes it's just good to take a time out and to look back and to step back and see the creation that God has put around us, whether it's nature, whether it's our families and our kids. It's good sometimes to just kind of step back, but it can also be amazingly overwhelming as well when you think about, that your smallness in the vastness of the universe. And it's a really good feeling to be overwhelmed when you're standing before all of creation. And that's a great kind of overwhelm, but it's not such a great feeling sometimes when you look into the vastness maybe of your situation and you feel extremely small compared to an overwhelmingness of a situation or a circumstance that lies before you. And though we know it's just a situation or a circumstance sometimes, and it's going to be temporary, that doesn't diminish the fact that sometimes when we look at it, it feels extremely difficult. We have no idea how we're going to make it through. We have no idea how we're going to go through to the other side. And it can be very, very frustrating. It can be very difficult. And sometimes it just doesn't line up with what we think should be happening, right? And so it can be something like finding a job, right? And finding a job, we feel like it should be something that's easy, right? Because that's part of the life plan is you get born, you go to school, you go to college or something, and then you get a job, and then if you don't like that job, you get a new job, right? And then you switch jobs. And it feels like it should be easy. But if you're in the midst of looking for a job and you just can't find one, right? It feels vast. It feels overwhelming. It's so hard because you don't know, what to do sometimes. It could be, you go to the doctor and you hear some news that you weren't quite expecting. And even though it's a health issue maybe that other people have gone through, and you might even know people that have gone through it, at the time, it can feel very vast, what lies ahead of you. Because you don't quite know what's going to happen. Right? It's uncharted territory. Or maybe you did something, said something, and fractured a relationship with someone. Maybe it was a family member or a kid or a spouse or a coworker. And you want to repair it, but you don't know how, and it seems vast, and it's almost overwhelming sometimes. And part of the problem is sometimes when we step back, right, it can seem like it's just it should just be a small step, right? Like, just apply for a job, just take the step, apply to like a bunch of different places, right? But when you're in the middle of it, that step seems like a million miles away. Right? Because you're like, if I know what I should do, but it's just hard. And sometimes you don't even know what's overwhelming you. Right? And you're just feeling this weight and this sense of this vastness ahead of you. And you don't even know how to go about fixing it. And so there are times and situations in our life where we feel like we are overwhelmed. And it might be some unforeseen expenses that all of a sudden popped up, and you don't quite know how you're going to pay, the bills with what you have in the bank account. Or maybe it's the loss of a loved one. Maybe it's something that happened a long time ago and you're still wrestling with, how do I keep going? How do I get over this? And every day you're just struggling with it, right? Maybe it feels like, maybe it's something that's happened in your past and it feels like you should have been able to move on, but yet you still feel like you're stuck, like your ankles are maybe, chained to something. You just can't take that step forward. What feels overwhelming to you in your life? Right? Because in this church, we have so many people, and if you're in a life group, I'm sure you hear prayers as well. Everyone is wrestling with different things, and we all are in places in our life where we are feeling overwhelmed. It might be a student, getting ready to go in the next school year, or ready to go on to college. It might be work, it might be health, whatever it is. We are all wrestling with different things, and if you're in a good spot right now and you don't feel overwhelmed, that's a really good spot to be in, right? But you can imagine times in your life when you were in that position and you know that you probably will be there again as well. And when we feel overwhelmed, sometimes it can feel like the situation is bigger than our Savior, right? And we know that's not the case, but doesn't still diminish the fact of how we feel. We can know God is in control of everything, yet still the worry and the doubts and the fear and then not knowing how to move forward or what we should do, or is this step the right step, it still consumes us. Right? And so we start thinking, like what ifs? What if I do this and this doesn't work out? And we get paralyzed with fear. What if I fail miserably? Or we think about what's going to happen. Like if I do that, what's going to happen to my family? What's going to happen to my kids? What's going to happen to my reputation? What's going to happen to my job? And so my goal today for us is really, really simple, and it's also at the same time I think really, really powerful, and that's just simply to magnify the God who's in control of your situation. Because he's not just like the Father who can help us out when we need it, but he really is the creator of all, right? From your situation to the lakes, to the trees, to the stars. And sometimes what we don't need as much is deliverance from our circumstance as to be reminded of the God who was with us through the circumstance, right? And to magnify him. Because of those of you, with kids, or even if you're a brother or sister with a younger sibling, sometimes when we ask our kids to do something, right, they might feel overwhelmed until we go along with them. And so Dairy Queen, right? Wonderful, full of ice cream. Kids love ice cream. Angie loves ice cream. I like ice cream. And So sometimes we would take my kids to Dairy Queen, and I remember, especially in the last couple of years, we would walk in, and I'd be like, all right, so what do you guys want to eat? And they would tell me what they want. I'd be like, all right, go to the counter and order. And they went from happiness to this look of, oh my gosh, what are you asking me to do? Go talk to somebody I don't know, right? Stranger danger. And so I'd be like, no, it's fine, because I want to teach them how to order food. It's a life lesson they're going to have to know. And so I'm like, it's fine. Just go up to the counter, and just tell them what you would like, and they would always say those same 5 words, right? Will you come with me? And as I took them by the hand and we go to the counter, right? Everything was a whole lot better. They still felt that anxiety of talking to someone and placing an order for a blizzard, but they knew that their parent was with them, right? Sometimes just having the presence of a parent, of a mom or dad, helps. And it doesn't matter, if you're a child like they were, all the way to an adult, right? Having mom or dad sometimes just plain helps. Because when you feel like you're in an overwhelming situation, mom or dad makes everything all better, because we don't have to face it alone. And so today we're going to be in the book of Genesis. We're going to go to Genesis 1. And the danger sometimes is when we come to a familiar passage or a familiar book, we've heard it so often that we can start to overlook its importance, right? Because we've heard it ever since we were in diapers. And we tend to read Genesis 1 as an account of simply how the world was created, right? As a textbook sometimes. This is how things came into being. And then we move on to Genesis 2, where it starts to zero in on the relationship between God and man, right? And then we move to Genesis 3, where you have the fall and sin enters the world. And then from that point on, the story really starts to take off. But we tend to view Genesis 1 just simply as the prelude, as a setup to simply everything else. Well, what I want to do today is to look at it from how the original audience might have looked at it, and then how that also then, what that means for you and I. Because the books of the Bible were written to a particular people at a particular time for a particular reason, right? And so to understand what they were going through and how they would have applied it and read it can really pay off in terms of how we deepen our relationship with God and how we understand Him as well. And we understand the God who wrote it and what it means for us today. And so, real quick, the background of Genesis is we place the author as Moses, that he wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. It's pretty commonly accepted that he wrote the first 5 books. It's mentioned over 40 times, 40 places in Scripture that Moses was the author. Jesus referenced it as well in a number of places. Like in John 5, he says, "Do not think that I will accuse you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, Moses, on whom you have set your hope. For if you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote of me. But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words?" In John 7:19, it says, "Has not Moses given you the law, yet none of you keeps the law?" In Mark, it says this, "And as for the dead being raised, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the passage about the bush, how God spoke to him, saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob?" Okay, and so it's pretty commonly accepted, even in Jesus' time, that the first 5 books of the Bible were written by Moses. Okay? And so assuming that it's Moses, probably wrote it between 1525 and 1405 BC, somewhere in there. And the purpose, so what's going on, right? To prepare the Israelites for the entrance into the promised land. To encourage them of being a chosen people and that their God would see them through. All right? Because so Moses, right, he's led the people out of Egypt where they were slaves, and then he goes to Mount Sinai. God gives him the law, right, and they takes him to the edge of the promised land. They send in spies. Spies are like, this land is amazing. This is what God has promised us, but we can't. There's no way we can take it because of the people that live in the land. And so God says, all right, so you're gonna walk around then for about 40 years. And then he brings them back to the edge of the promised land again. And so if you're the original audience, if you're Israel, right, you have this amazing promise of God that he has set before you. but you're also crazy scared because it feels overwhelming, right? And that's pretty difficult. There's about 3 different big locations that is in Genesis. Chapters 1 through 11 are in Babylonia, roughly 12 through 36. You get to largely Abraham and Isaac, and so you're in Palestine, and then 37 through 50 move to Joseph, sorry, and that's how they end up in Egypt. But the first 5 books of the Bible, span from the time of creation to when Israel has been freed from Egypt, wandering the wilderness, 10 commandments given, and now they're on the border of the promised land, ready to enter, but also afraid. So you've got a promise, but you've also got some fear because you have to go in and take the land, which seems insurmountable. And so they're in an overwhelming situation. So you put yourself in their shoes as we go through the first chapter. We're going to read some and just point out some things along the way. But my hope and my prayer is that this will also deepen our relationship with God in whatever situation we're facing as well. And so it says, in the beginning, God, the same God who was said he'd be with Israel, created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And if you stop there for a second, that word for formless, tahu, is also found 20 times in the Old Testament, usually in parallel with the words desert or wasteland or wilderness. Right, and so where it says formless, it's also oftentimes correlated with wilderness of it's just out there. There's nothing substantial about it, right? And so whatever was there in that formlessness, God made sense of it, right? And the Spirit was where nothing else was. And just as God was in the formlessness and wilderness before the earth was ordered, He was also with Israel in their wilderness, as well as they were traveling through it. And God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw that the light was good, and He separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. And God said, let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water. And so God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky. And there was evening, and there was morning the second day. And God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear. And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters He called seas, and God saw that it was good. And so if you hold up there for a second, if you're Israel, you've seen God's power over water, right? It was how you came through Egypt, right? You've seen His power over water. And you've seen His power. You'd remember back to when He did that. And sometimes when you're in the midst of an overwhelming situation, we have to go back to the times in our past where we've seen God at work in our lives. And we've seen Him split the seas of impossibility as He was leading us through. When He provided a way that we didn't necessarily see, because it's easy to focus on the barriers ahead of us because they're big and they're scary, right? And we can forget that He also made a way through barriers in the past, when He lined things up so that everything worked out just perfectly in your life. And as I was doing this passage, I thought back to when I was in college, and I found out, because I was an archaeology major, and like most students, I don't really pay attention sometimes to the syllabus, what you have to do for the classes. And I found out I had to do a field study coming up where you go off for like 6 weeks and do actual archaeology work, right? And so I found this out, I think, in like January or February. And in order for me to graduate on time, I had to do it by that coming summer. Well, I didn't want to do it in Minnesota where I was going to school, because who really wants to do archaeology in Minnesota, right? There's not a lot there. I wanted to go to the Southwest. And so I started looking at all these different colleges to do their field study programs, and nothing was working out. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is not good. I should not have waited this long. And then as I was checking it out, I found out that UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, still had openings. And my sister had went to UNLV. And when I used to visit her, I used to think, man, this would be really fun to go to school here. And so I'd always kind of wanted to go to UNLV. And then I found out that they were also going to be working in the Southwest, in the desert, in the Great Basin, right, which is now just a pure desert. So if you looked at like Independence Day, right, when we watched Independence Day and Will Smith is walking through dragging the alien and everything, that was filmed in that area. They tested a lot of missiles in the 50s there. Now there's just not a lot, but it used to be a bunch of massive lakes. And so where we were working was where the people that have first come into America from the land bridge, right, thousands of years ago, where they had come down. And so we were working in that strata. And that was pretty cool. And so it was something that I always wanted, like that interested me. And so God had a way of just kind of working everything together where I was able to fulfill and get my credits and go to a school that I always wanted to, and even work in a place and a location doing the kind of stuff that I had wanted to do. Right? And I don't remember that very often, but it's something that God had placed in my life where he had worked something in the past. You know, and I think of Aubrey when he spoke a few weeks ago. He's talking about Alyssa, right? And how the birth of Alyssa, right? And how he saw God always working through that situation, right? And there are times when we come back to how God is working in our past, right? And he can use that to say, I'm going to continue to work in your future as well. And then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds, and it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening and there was morning the third day. So to an Israelite to whom harvests are important, their God is the one who provides. And God said, let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser night to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. Now, if you're an Israelite, how do you know the days on the calendar? Right? Because they don't have the solar calendar that we do. They go by the moon. Right? So they have a lunar calendar. And they don't just order their life by it, but that's also how they plan their festivals and times of worship as well. And so the lights govern their time. The new moon, there would be a feast with special sacrifices. They started every month on the new moon, and there'd be special sacrifices, and the priest would blow special silver trumpets. On the seventh month, that was basically like a big Sabbath. No one was allowed to do any work. And the full moon for Nisan was the Passover, right? So when they see sun and moon, it's not just stars. This is involved in the rhythms of their life and how they worship. And God gave you and I ways to worship in the simple rhythms of our life, because we don't pay as much attention anymore to the moon and the sun, right? Other than provides life. But how else is God working in the rhythms of your life? We can see him as well. So it might be the love that you have for your kids. It might be for you. It might be something with nature. Maybe it's fishing or going on a hike. But where do you see God at work? Simply in the rhythms of your life. How is he orchestrated to say that he's there with you? I mean, church, right? Church is part of that. Treehouse is part of that. Refuge is part of that, right? And that's why it's so important. Sometimes we just get going in life and we miss that God is actually intimately involved in the rhythms of our life. And God said, let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky. And so God created the great creatures of the sea, and every living thing with which the water teems and that moves about in it according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. There was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. And so then you go into the next one. It says, and God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock. So we have birds, and then we have livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind. And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Here's the deal. The worship of God for the Israelites, right, and their sacrifices, if they were going to make a sacrifice, what did they have to use? Livestock, right? Livestock were created on the same day man's about to be created. Livestock was created on the same day as man. So their substitution was created on the same day. But if they didn't have enough money, right, if they were poor, like Jesus' parents, what did they use? Birds, right? So then they could go back to day 5, and that was acceptable. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his image. In the image of created them, in the image of God he created them, male and female. He created them. And God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." And see, when he says, "Be fruitful and increase in number," that sounds a lot like the promises that they would have heard that were given to their forefathers, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Right? And so it's an echo of what they've been hearing. And then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And that, when I read that too, that kind of messed me up. Not, I mean, the Israelites wouldn't have got that as much, but I mean, we can put a person on the moon, and we're getting ready to send someone to Mars, and we've got things that are outside the solar system already. But we still can't figure out all the phytonutrients that are in a plant that sustain us. That's pretty cool. But God made it to sustain us, for food. And God saw all that he had made, and it was very good, and there was evening, and there was morning the 6th day. All right? And so if you're Israel, and you're on the journey that God has called you to do, on the brink of taking what he has promised and what you've been waiting for and what's been in store for you, but you're feeling overwhelmed and you're feeling fearful, right, of what you have to go through. The story of Genesis 1 isn't just a story of how the world was created. It's a story of that same God who created the world, who is with you, right? So he's not just a vague being. It's personal. That God is your God, right? Saying the God of creation is the same God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. He's the same God that's with you now, nation of Israel. He's the same God that is with us today in our situation, right? And so it's the same God who created everything. Genesis 1 becomes a whole lot more personal, right? It's not just a textbook of this is how things were created, but this is how God is at work. And he was a God who was present when the earth was formless and nothing but a wilderness. He's like Israel. I'm the same God that's with you in your wilderness. So just like it would have given the Israelites confidence in their situation, right? It's the same God that set up all creation. They can trust him. And so although you might feel like you're overwhelmed, right, in your job, in your finances, in your health, again, you might not even know. You just might feel that anxiety, that overwhelmingness. And you don't quite know, how you're going to make it through, right? He's that same God is with you. He's the same God who splits the seas for Israel, but before that, he was the God who split the seas of the earth, right? He didn't just create the moon and the sun, right? But he's the one that set them in their orbits. And when the time came for Joshua, at one point, he was even able to stall the sun in his place, right? He's over all of it. I mean, he's a God of the vastness. He created it. He's in control of everything of it. He takes what's formless and void, wilderness, and out of it he makes a purpose. And that's the God of Genesis 1. And that's the same God that you and I worship, right? And so he's there with you in the vastness of whatever situation you're facing, as you feel overwhelmed with the fight that you have ahead of you, just like Israel did when they were getting ready to go in. And so what better way to magnify him, right, than to take the Lord's Supper together? Because this is the same God that we're celebrating and remembering, of what he will go through for us, that he always will provide a way according to his plan, because nothing overwhelms him, right? We might be freaking out in the vastness of our situation, but God is as cool and collected as a parent walking their child by the hand to a counter at Dairy Queen, right? Nothing phases him, because the God of Genesis 1 is the same God that we came in here and are worshiping today. He can do anything and everything over the universe. And so this time, I'm going to ask the elders to come up, and we're going to take communion together, or the Lord's Supper. All right? And the greatness of it, I mean, there's a lot of things about the Lord's Supper, right? But it's also a remembrance. And as we talked about, there are times when we need to remember what God did, and this is the most important of all, right? Because he made a way when we didn't have one, to take us from death to life. And so he's the same God who created everything, who saw Israel through their wilderness, and in our situation, he provided a way when we didn't have one to go through ourselves, right? And so we're going to partake of the Lord's Supper. Let's pray real quick. God, I thank you for this church. I thank you for our faith. I thank you that you're the God who didn't just create the world, but you're a God that's intimately wrapped up in the people's lives that you created. And you want us to know you. You will walk with us as a parent walks with your child. Sometimes we have to feel like we're going on alone, because sometimes you'll let us learn to walk. But you're always there, you're always with us, you're always watching over us. And so for the people that are going through difficult situations, and it might look like the world is vast, I ask that you bring to their mind that you're a God over the vastness. And you created order out of what seemed formless. And you're a God that won't let us be overwhelmed, because nothing overwhelms you. So I thank you in Christ's name. Amen. All right. So, if you haven't done Lord's Supper here, we're going to pass it out. And when you get it, just go ahead, hold on to it. And then we'll all take the bread together. And then we'll pass out the grape juice. And then we'll all take that together. Okay. And so, it says for the bread in Matthew, right? As they were eating, Jesus took the bread. And he broke it. And he gave it to his disciples. And he said, "This is my body. And it's broken for you." Just go ahead.
Most gracious Heavenly Father, it's overwhelming to be able to come into your presence through the death of your Son, his resurrection, to come before you, Lord, and thank you. Thank you for what you endured for us on the cross. Thank you for giving your life for us. And so we take to this bread and honor you. In Jesus' name, amen.
This is body broken for you. Go ahead and eat. And it says that he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins."
Father God, we just we come to you today so thankful for all that you do for us. Thankful for your Son, for the sacrifice that He made and that you made on our behalf. Took care of all the hard stuff. If we can just remember that, and carry it with us every day, and remember that we're soldiers in your army, and we've got a really special weapon. That's love. And if we'll just use our weapon every day, we can make a difference, like Aubrey said, and we can make something really special in this community. So, again, thank you. We love you. It's in your Son's name that we pray.
It's the blood of the covenant poured out for you. You can drink it. Now, may the God of Genesis 1, God of the covenant, be with you and guide you, okay? And watch over you in whatever vast, overwhelming situation that you're walking through.